Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I'm Ian DeMars alongside Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, we're unfortunately at that time of the year. The Super Bowl's ended, and now we're into the off season. But we are looking forward to some more football. We got some exciting news on the show today.
Yep, and we are also here with special guest Eric Klamrowski from our podcast on Brew Sports about the NBA called Run It Back. How's it going, Eric?
Not too bad. Glad to be on here. I mean, this is my first time being on someone else's podcast. It's like Creed from The Office, where he's talking about being in the cult, being a leader or a follower. It's more fun being a follower.
Yeah, it's definitely a good show to reference here to start off. But yeah, let's talk about obviously the big game that happened this past week, and that was Super Bowl 53 between the Rams and the Patriots. And I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I kind of called it the super disappointing bowl because it was a game that didn't really have too much excitement. It was a slow-moving game. We only saw 16 total points in the game. The Patriots did pull out the win, which means Ryan correctly predicted the Super Bowl matchup and the right team winning it at the beginning of the season. They won 13-3 over the Rams. Yeah, just as I said, it was a very disappointing game in my opinion. I mean, how would you guys react to it? Was this something that you thought was disappointing too, or was there anything that kind of caught your attention?
I thought the biggest thing, a lot of people are calling it like it was just a defensive game, like a pitcher's duel type deal. But I just thought, for the most part, both offenses just struggled to move the ball. I think you really saw how much Jared Goff misses Cooper Kupp in this game. But, it wasn't like the defenses were getting a lot of takeaways or big plays. It was just a lackluster offensive performance, in my opinion.
Yeah, and collectively, I think that we can agree that this is one of the worst Super Bowls during our lifetime. There are a few others that come to mind in that category. There was the Buccaneers versus the Raiders, which was a blowout going in the Buccaneers' favor. And then more recently, there was the Seahawks and Broncos, where Peyton Manning just couldn't do anything against the Legion of Boom and the Seahawks defense. And what made this one worse was that it wasn't even a new team that was winning. It was the same old team that we've had to watch for the past 2 decades, the Patriots. We had to watch Tom Brady hoist another Lombardi trophy. And at this point, it's just kind of getting redundant. I think that probably at least 75% of the United States was hoping that the Rams would pull it out. And then we also had the awkwardness of the NFC Championship game being marred with the controversial pass interference call. So there were already those 2 things that were going against the Super Bowl, and it just didn't live up to any of the potential hype that it had. I don't know about you guys, but when I was watching this game, one thing that came to mind was that I really think it's Bill Belichick that's won all of these Super Bowls for the Patriots. And you can point to Tom Brady being there the whole time, but they won the game with only 13 points being scored. They could have put in almost any quarterback in the NFL and probably scored a similar amount of points. So even though Tom Brady has an impressive amount of championships, I equate him to kind of like the Bill Russell of the NFL.
Yeah, and you look at the game, it wasn't just the game I think that was disappointing. I think the whole event of the day was disappointing. I mean, obviously the game didn't have the effects that we were hoping for. It seemed like the commercials weren't as exciting, although they've kind of been on the decline the last few years. And then the halftime show kind of fell down a little bit. I mean, you have a big group in Maroon 5, but I think some of the people that they tried having come in, Travis Scott and Big Boy, I don't think it really all gelled together. And then there were rumors that there was going to be a somewhat mix of SpongeBob in there from the Bubble Bowl episode quite some time ago, and they didn't really touch much base with it. So I think overall the whole day was just disappointing. I would definitely agree on your point saying that it was one of the most disappointing Super Bowls in recent years. But, I mean, let's look at some of the positives from the game. Obviously, the defenses played were very solid throughout the game. Julian Edelman had a huge game, ended up winning Super Bowl MVP. So did you guys agree with that thought of Edelman being the MVP, or did you think that someone else on the Patriots deserved it?
I agree with him winning it. I honestly was just really hoping it wasn't going to be Brady again because he obviously he's their best player and all that, but he didn't play well enough to get the award. And when Edelman was, I think it was like 60% of the yards or something like that. But one thing I do hope that people slow their roll on with him winning this is I hear like notable NFL people saying, is Julian Edelman a Hall of Famer? You know, he's kind of like a Robert Horry of the NFL, where he's had really big moments and does well in the playoffs. But we're talking about a guy who's never been a Pro Bowler and has two 1,000-yard seasons. I think people need to, slow their boat on that one.
That's absolutely true, Eric, that point that you made. I was honestly hoping that they would have found a defensive player to be MVP of the Super Bowl, because that's what it seemed it deserved. Because the offense, 13 points, Julian Edelman did put up a pretty solid stat line. He didn't have a touchdown, though. He just had the most yards, and Gronkowski wasn't that far behind him with 87 to Edelman's 141 receiving yards. I'd have liked to have seen it be a defensive player, and that's really the only thing that I felt they missed on, because this game just seemed like it was warranted with such a low-scoring affair.
Yeah, and it would have made sense to go defensive player in a game like this, but there wasn't really too many defensive players that really stood out in the game. I mean, we saw Dante Hightower, I believe, had a couple sacks in the game. Stephon Gilmore had that big interception late in the game. But other than that, there wasn't really too much, at least exciting plays for the Patriots defensively overall in that game. So it makes sense to go Edelman. I think there was an argument that you could go Sony Michel, since he almost had 100 yards again and did score another touchdown for him being a rookie. That is quite impressive to do. But I think it does make sense to go with Edelman in this case. And then, Ryan, I want to touch back on your point you made about Bill Belichick. You said that the Patriots, all the Super Bowls they've won, it's been because of him. And you look at some of the post-game remarks that he had said, he didn't really take too much credit for it. He was kind of saying that, well, it's mainly just the team. So do you think that's him actually saying that it was more the team, or do you think that's him trying to hide the fact that he knows that he is the reason why they've won all 6 of these Super Bowls?
I think that was sort of on a case-by-case basis. He knows that if the defense doesn't hold St. Louis, Los Angeles to a ridiculously low amount of points and yards, that they probably don't win that game. So he can't go out there and say, yeah, I played really well, I carried the team on my back. He has to say, everybody else carried me this game. And that's been kind of the case in a lot of the Super Bowls, as a big defensive play makes it go the Patriots' favor. A big kick makes it go in the Patriots' favor. And like I said, I really think you could plug in probably 20 other quarterbacks in the NFL, and they would have a similar stat line as Brady, a similar amount of championships. And if you look at Belichick's take on Brady, he was willing to trade him, and he was willing to go with Jimmy Garoppolo. So clearly to Belichick, Brady is not an integral part of this team and probably never really has been. He's just the guy that they can put at the helm that to this point has listened to what Bill Belichick tells him and doesn't turn the ball over excessively. And I think that's all that Belichick really wanted and needed. He sees Brady as a piece of the puzzle, not as the face of the franchise.
Okay, what are your thoughts on it, Eric?
I'd have to agree, because it seems like in the Super Bowls that the Patriots do win. It's not like Brady plays incredible. I mean, arguably his best performance, they lost in the Super Bowl. So I guess my question for Ryan would be, like, what type of quarterback do you see being able to fit that system, kind of like a very little mistakes, makes the throws he needs to, but isn't going to blow you away type deal? Who do you think would be like, you could insert into there? I know you named about 20 of them, but I'd like to think that there isn't 20 that would have the success of Tom Brady, but I do agree that there's probably a quarterback or two out there. Like, stay away from the Mahomes and the Rodgers. Who do you think is a solid quarterback that you think could have the success?
I think you could go Kirk Cousins. I think you could go Eli Manning, even this type of season. I think that you could go Nick Foles would probably fit into that category. I think any number of players like that would give you kind of similar stats. And we saw it last year with Foles taking over for Wentz. We assumed that Wentz was what made the Eagles such a good team. But when he went out, Foles carried it even probably better than Carson Wentz did. So I think that we're so driven to pick out the quarterback on any team and say that quarterback is the reason they've won, especially when one has such longevity as Tom Brady. But in reality, I think a lot of times, unless you do have a Mahomes, unless you have a Rodgers, unless you have a Peyton Manning, it's really the team that wins, and it's the quarterback's job to just make a couple key throws and to not make any back-breaking mistakes. And I think that's what Brady's been really good at his entire career. But I think that you put a player like Mahomes, you put a player like Rodgers on the Patriots, they might have won, twice as many Super Bowls as they have with Tom Brady.
Right. I mean, my first thought was a quarterback who could have won all the Super Bowls Brady did would be a Phillip Rivers.
Yes, absolutely. That is a great pick.
So. Yeah, and I kind of agree with that at that point. But because the thing is with Bill Belichick is, remember the year Tom Brady went down in the first game of the year, Matt Castle filled in, and they won 11 games that year. They missed the playoffs, but they won 11 games.
11 games with Matt Castle. They went, I think, was it 1-1 with Jacoby Brissett and 2-0 with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, and you'll look at what happened with Matt Castle after he goes to, I believe it was Kansas City, led him to one playoff appearance, didn't really do too much after that. Look at Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, had great success last year, but then got injured this year, so we really couldn't see that potential that Bill Belichick saw in them. So, I mean, a lot of this is put on Bill Belichick, but a lot of this makes you also wonder if Tom Brady wasn't with the Patriots, is he putting up numbers like this?
I think Eric pretty much nailed it with Phillip Rivers. I think Phillip Rivers might even be a little bit more talented, like a little more physically gifted than Tom Brady. But I think that you probably see him as a guy that can take a good team to the playoffs and possibly to a Super Bowl. But I don't think you could see him doing what Peyton Manning did with the Colts when he was basically the reason that team was winning 11 games a year, or what Rodgers has been doing with the Packers. I think he's just not in that caliber, but I think we assume he is just because of his achievements.
Boy, let me tell you, you calling Phillip Rivers more physically gifted than Tom Brady is like calling J.R. Smith a smarter player than Boogie Cousins. But I got one for you. The ultimate no-risk quarterback, healthy Alex Smith before he destroys his leg. How many Super Bowls does he win with those Patriots teams?
I would say 3.
I think you could definitely put a couple up there for sure for Smith, because to me, I think Smith resembles a lot of Tom Brady.
Okay.
I mean, you see what Smith did with the 49ers when they had a good team. He took them to the NFC Championship twice. So he has had some success when there's a team around him with a good defense. If you look at a lot of the Patriots Super Bowl wins, the totals for scores haven't necessarily been mind-blowing. So the first one against the Rams, I think, was around 20 points, if I remember correctly. This one, 13 points. They're usually somewhere in the higher 20s to 30s. And I think we've seen that a player like Alex Smith, when he has some weapons, is capable of putting that all together. But I'm going to move us along to the next topic here, because I was going to say with the Patriots, it's not only the players that you see when they go elsewhere, they're just not as good, but also the Bill Belichick coaching tree. So I think that Belichick does so much for this team that even his coaches look a lot better than they actually are in real life. And one of them looks like they're about to get hired by the Miami Dolphins, and that's Brian Flores. Ian, I'll go with you first. Do you think that this is a good move for the Dolphins?
I mean, I think it's a nice choice because they have a nice, solid young defense. But I don't think it's what they need. I think they needed to go after a more defensive-minded or not defensive, but a more offensive-schemed coach. Because you look at that offense, they've kind of just been inconsistent over the last couple of years. Yes, Ryan Tannehill has been injured, but I mean, this year he was pretty healthy for the most part, and didn't seem to like go together. It seemed like they had stretches where they played really well. Then they had those stretches where they looked like one of the worst teams in the league. Kenyon Drake played pretty solid this year, and they also had Frank Gore play well, but we saw Frank Gore get injured towards the end of the year, and Kenyon Drake still is a younger back. And then we never really found out who's the number one receiver for this team. Devontae Parker has the talent to be a one receiver, but he lost a lot of playing time this year early on. Did get some at the end. Kenny Stills is a big play threat, but I'm not sure he's a number one receiver. And Danny Amendola is a great slot player, but being in a slot usually doesn't mean you're going to be a number one receiver. At least nowadays, I think. So I think they needed to get a more offensive-minded coach to try and come up with an identity for that team. But I'm not saying it's a bad hire, but like you had said, it's interesting to see how this will work because we've seen a lot of coaches from the Belichick tree not have too much success in the NFL. So it wouldn't surprise me if, depending on what happens in a couple years, if the Dolphins look for another head coach.
And everybody wants to always talk about how the Sean McVay coaching tree thing has gotten out of hand. So we mentioned Cliff Kingsbury, how everyone's looking for the next Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur. So people are going crazy about this right now, saying that like people are getting jobs that shouldn't be getting jobs just because they've had some sort of contact with Sean McVay. In reality, that's been going on for a number of years with Bill Belichick. There's a lot of people, Matt Patricia, Eric Mangini, and then Brian Flores, Mike Vrabel, a ton of people that have been in contact with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady that have gotten jobs and have not succeeded. So I think this is going to be another example of a player or a coach going and getting an opportunity simply because they've been around Bill Belichick. And I think they're not the powerhouse behind the operation that's the Patriots. So I don't think they're going to have the success that the team hiring them is expecting. But bringing up Sean McVay too, another person from his coaching tree just got hired, and that is quarterback or former quarterback of the Cornhuskers, Zach Taylor, who got hired to be the head coach of the Bengals. What do you think about this hire? Is this better than the Flores hire or worse?
Well, I think it's worse. And the reason why I say that is because they have a solid offense and offensive talent base in Cincinnati. Andy Dalton was playing pretty well this year until he got injured. They have A.J. Green. They have Tyler Boyd, who emerged this year. Like I said, A.J. Green got injured this year. Tyler Eifert was playing solid until he got injured. Joe Mixon was top 5 in the league in rushing. But that defense was one of the worst in the league this year. And what did they do to fix it? They hired an offensive-minded head coach. I don't really understand the hire unless you're trying to improve Andy Dalton, which I've heard could be some of the case. But you want to what? That defense was so bad you needed to get someone who knows something about defense. You played well offensively last year, but you needed someone defensively. So I'm actually more of a fan of the Dolphins hire than I am of the Bengals hire.
I think the Bengals hire of Zach Taylor was kind of, when you see something happening for too long, they want to make a sudden drastic change. So we saw Marvin Lewis was supposedly more of a defensive-minded coach. He was there for so many years. And I think now they're just overreacting to trying to change away from what Marvin Lewis was. So they're going for a guy who's younger, guy who has ties to McVay, like we talked about almost every team needing a coach is doing. And I think they've just swung the pendulum the other direction. They're saying we're just going to try to boost this offense. We have pieces on offense. We're going to try and get better players on defense, but we want a guy that's going to elevate Dalton, Green, and Eifert so we actually know what we have there. Because getting to that time where they're going to have to decide whether they want to keep Andy Dalton or whether they want to go in a different direction. And I kind of think that this is part of that decision. They want to see how this plays out. They want to see if a change is good for Dalton in that offense. And if it's not, they're going to make a change probably at quarterback.
Yeah, and Eric, just you can give a brief touch on this. Do you think that either of these make sense? Or...
I guess as far as the Brian Flores hire goes, I see the Dolphins completely blowing up that team. I mean, you've already been seeing reports that they plan to release Tannehill. I personally think they're going to content loss with Devontae Parker. So I really don't know what coach actually could have helped that team. You know, maybe they find a way to utilize Kenyon Drake a little more like they did last year. I know a lot of people are expecting him to have a bit of a breakout year. And then I agree with you on the Bengals hire being a head scratcher because, yeah, you already got your offense. You can only have so many talented defensive players before you have to put a scheme together. I mean, what comes to mind is you get all these overrated defenses now in the NFL where offense is becoming increasingly more important than defense. You know, What happened to Saxonville this year? What happened to the Broncos front seven that was so imposing? What happened to 2 years ago? Everyone thought the Giants defense was going to be very good. There has to be some scheming involved with that. But one thing I wanted to ask too, Ryan, you're kind of talking about the Bill Belichick coaching tree. What do you think it is about Belichick assistant coaches versus like Andy Reid's assistant coaches have had actually good success in the NFL?
I think the biggest part of it is that Bill Belichick is the mind behind the operation. And I think each coach that he employs has a tiny job that they do. But I think Belichick really oversees the majority of what's happening in New England. And he's been such a mainstay there that he has so much respect, and the culture is so much revolving around him and what he wants to do, that all of these people that come in and coach for him are really just role players. They're just pieces. And then people take them and want to make them the main event and the main person in charge. And they just haven't had that experience because Belichick has not let them do what they need to do to become better coaches. And I think that's almost part of the genius of Bill Belichick, is that he's able to just take in new people and fill the roles that he needs filled without giving away all of this coaching talent to other teams. Because you've seen like Bill O'Brien goes in the AFC still. Eric Mangini was in the same division. And while these people will sometimes occasionally have a team that beats one of Belichick's teams, he really has the inside knowledge on how to beat most of these coaches. And he is getting coaches out of his system that aren't going to flourish anywhere else. And so he's constantly going to have the upper hand when facing these teams. And I think the biggest part of it is just that they haven't had the same experiences that some of Andy Reid's assistant coaches have had. It's kind of like when things are too easy for somebody, they just don't blossom to the point when they can do many things on their own. And he makes it really easy for his coaches to succeed in that system.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on some of those points there. I just think that when it comes to some of these coaches, a lot of these coaches that we see let go or that are gone for the Patriots tend to be the defensive side of the ball. But the thing is, Bill Belichick controls a lot of that aspect of the game. That's why Josh McDaniels isn't leaving New England anytime soon, because he's the one who's focusing on the offense, and Bill Belichick is having these other guys focus on the defense, but he's putting his word in more on the defensive side than I would say on the offensive side. So that when you see all these coaches get opportunities, that's why they're starting to struggle a little bit, because some of the stuff that Belichick taught them, he's not there anymore, so they have to try and do some of that stuff on their own. That's why we're seeing a lot of these guys struggle and take possibly 3 to 4 years to finally get something going. And it'd be curious to see what happens if Josh McDaniels were to finally leave, and maybe we start to see some flaws out of that offense. But that's something I don't expect to see happening. I only expect to see that happen once Bill Belichick retires. Josh McDaniels probably takes over the reins at New England. But that could be a few years away, because it would not surprise me one bit if when Belichick retires, Brady retires, Josh McDaniels takes over the team, and then who knows, maybe he pulls a Bill Belichick, resigns, and goes somewhere else in the AFC East.
Don't forget, too, that we actually already saw Josh McDaniels as a head coach, and he didn't have any more success than anybody else that Bill Belichick has had in his coaching tree.
Yeah, very true. Did have one brief appearance in the playoffs, but didn't really lead to too much success. But let's move on to a team that is starting to find some success with a guy who they weren't expecting to lead, and that's the Eagles and Nick Foles. So the big question after their loss to the Saints was, are they going to franchise tag Nick Foles? And it is expected that they will franchise tag him with the goal to trade him. Now, we had talked about this. We had assumed this was going to happen. But right now, what is the best destination for Nick Foles if the Eagles were to trade him?
Ryan, you can take this one first. I got to think about that.
Sure. So I think that there's one situation that fits really, really well for Nick Foles, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. We know that team, when they have somebody capable at quarterback, has the pieces in place on the defensive side of the ball and probably on the offensive side of the ball too, to be extremely formidable in the AFC. Now, their division has some talent in it now. Andrew Luck showed what he can do with that team this year now that he's healthy in Indianapolis. The Texans had a really solid season. So it's not like that division is as bad as it used to be. But with Nick Foles manning the reins in Jacksonville, I think that would give them a huge chance to get back to the success that they experienced last year.
Okay. Eric, have you thought of your team? Or?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about Jacksonville, but I think another one that he could have some success with would be if Denver chooses to move on from Case Keenum, or I know who's the rookie coming up that Elway was smitten with. Locke was his last name.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if they weren't able to get him, I could see it. But I mean, those are really the only two teams that are decent that already don't have either a solid quarterback or a teams like the Jets or Buffalo, where it's like, okay, they have to wait for their talent to develop. Cleveland's not going to go for them. Cincinnati has what they consider to be an established quarterback. So there's really not too many middling teams that could use someone of his services, because it really seems to be that every NFL franchise, I guess most NFL franchises that are in that 6-10 to 8-8 record, they, in my opinion, overvalue their quarterbacks, like the Matt Staffords and Matt Ryans and whoever Tampa Bay is going to throw out next year. So.
You mentioned Tampa Bay too, just in passing, but that's another place that you could see Nick Foles going to if they do decide to move away from Jameis Winston. And you never know with these teams, because some teams do fall in love with a certain player. So if there's been a team like the Cardinals that have been watching Nick Foles for a while and think that he's the real deal and they're not 100% sold on Rosen after this year, I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see them trade a young quarterback and get a more experienced veteran quarterback if they're in more of a win-now mentality. And there's some teams we're not thinking too, such as the Oakland Raiders, that we don't really know how they feel about Derek Carr right now. Washington Redskins have the situation with Alex Smith, and they could use somebody dependable at quarterback. There's a lot of teams out there that could be interested in Foles if they're looking to move away from the people they consider their franchise quarterback, but we kind of see as more average. The Giants could be another potential place if they do decide to move away from Eli Manning. So I think there's some teams out there that we're not really thinking of that Foles could go to. And I kind of have a feeling that it's going to be a surprise when they announce where he's traded to.
You want to what? I have that surprise for you guys. And you're probably not thinking about it, but I think a team that could definitely be a play, the Carolina Panthers. And the reason why I say that is because Cam Newton has had shoulder injuries the last couple of years. In fact, had to be shut down this year because of pain in the shoulder. You want to what? If this lingers into next season, they're going to need a quarterback, and there have been reports that he could possibly even not play next year due to his shoulder. And if that is the case, then Carolina makes the most sense out of all this. They have a dynamic weapon in the backfield of Christian McCaffrey. They have a couple up-and-coming receivers and Devin Funchess and DJ Moore. You put a quarterback like Nick Foles in that system, I think that would work perfectly. But that all depends on what happens with Cam Newton's shoulder. If it heals and it's perfectly fine, then, hey, they don't really need to do that. Or maybe you want to what? They need some insurance, because they didn't have really a backup quarterback this year when Newton was shut down the last couple of games. So even if you trade him just to be the backup for a year, I think might be the best option just because of Cam Newton's recent injury history. So depending on how
is that, think about what they would have to probably give up to get Nick Foles, though. The Eagles have a quarterback that is capable of winning a Super Bowl, that has a Super Bowl MVP, that took them to the playoffs again this year. They're going to be having probably a huge asking price for him. And so I don't see a team taking him just to be a backup, even a backup and an insurance policy.
Yeah, it's just kind of tough because there are reports that the Eagles are looking to only get a third-round pick for Nick Foles. Are you saying that you think he's more valued than a third-round pick?
I think if you look at the amount that people are giving up for other players, like Amari Cooper had a high draft pick. I don't think you can make the argument that Nick Foles is less valuable than Amari Cooper when quarterback is the position that everybody is crazy for right now. The belief right now is that you cannot win without a good quarterback. And so these teams that desperately need one, like Jacksonville, that have great players that they want to take advantage of in their win now young state, I think they're going to give a first-round pick for Nick Foles. I think they're going to give a first-round and a fourth-round pick for Nick Foles. I think that this is going to be one of the biggest bidding wars for a quarterback that we've seen in recent memory.
Okay.
The guy's won a championship already. He took a team to a championship, took a team to the playoffs again. We know that he can do it. The only question is, can he do it away from Philadelphia?
That is the question, and you want to know what? It would not surprise me if we do see him in a new uniform. I'd probably say by the NFL draft, but fortunately we're a couple months away from that, so that's just a question that's going to be answered then. But let's go back to the Super Bowl. So obviously this NFL season's not over. Let's look a little bit ahead to the next season now. So who do you think right now? Obviously we still have the offseason, the draft, and everything. But right now, what's your Super Bowl prediction for next year?
Eric, I'll let you take that first, unless you need a moment to think, because I have an answer for you ready.
No, I've been cheating by looking at the itinerary before this now. So I'm going to go with New Orleans finally gets to the Super Bowl, and they will be taking on the Indianapolis Colts.
All right, and who do you have winning that matchup?
I think Drew Brees goes out on top with this one. He said he's in for one more run here. I mean, me, like most of the nation, thinks they were robbed their chance against the Rams. And then as far as the Colts getting there, I think they have some nice young defensive players. If you can get Andrew Luck, maybe even a bit better receiving core, they have a good offensive line. But I was in the minority that I was telling people a couple of weeks before the playoffs that if Andrew Luck gets that team to the playoffs, that he deserves to win MVP. And I can't really argue with Mahomes' historic season, but I don't expect that to be a fluke season from the Colts. I think they'll come back even stronger.
I think that's a pretty solid pick. They really surged at the end of the season. I actually expected them to do even a little better in the playoffs than they did because they had so much momentum going in. They looked so good.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a solid matchup because look at what's happened to the Saints the last couple of years. They had the shocker against Minnesota, the miracle in Minneapolis. Then the controversial play at the end of the NFC Championship game. I think because of that, I think signs are pointing towards that something's going to happen to get them to the Super Bowl, or signs could also point that they get to the Super Bowl and something controversial happens.
I think with the Saints, it's legitimately going to be Super Bowl or bust. It's either going to be they make it to the Super Bowl or they just have a terrible season and go like 6-10. But I actually agree with Eric that the Saints are going to make the Super Bowl next year. They showed how resilient they were this year after the Minnesota Miracle, coming back and having such a good season, not having a hangover from that. I think that this coming year they get it done. I think the Rams are going to be a little bit hungover from this loss to the Patriots. I think the Bears are going to be the trendy pick, but I think they're going to fall flat. I think it's going to be the Saints. And in the AFC, I think it's going to be fourth time in a row for the New England Patriots. They make it back again, and I think the Saints win this time.
All right, and you want to know what, Ryan? I'm not going to doubt you on that because you correctly picked this year's. So, I mean, it's early on, but, I mean, definitely a legit matchup. Could a lot of people said should have been the Super Bowl this year, but definitely could be next year's. Looking at next year, though, I kind of liked obviously Kansas City played great. I think that they were so close to getting there. They were nearly one Patrick Mahomes opportunity in overtime, getting to the Super Bowl. I think that the offense is going to continue to rise. I think they're going to find some improvement on the defensive side of the football. So I think that they're going to come out of the AFC And I kind of like New Orleans out of the NFC. So we're all huge hyped on New Orleans. But you look at their defense, started to look like the defense of a couple years ago, second half of the season. The offense struggled at the beginning of the year, but got going late. I think with all those pieces, Drew Brees gets there. But I'm going to go with the Kansas City Chiefs. Drew Brees is going to get the momentum. It's going to be a great game. But I'm loving what I'm seeing from Patrick Mahomes. I think that this is the time for Kansas City 1 year from now.
So we're all on the Saints.
Yep.
I think that's one thing that's neat about the NFL is you look at the NBA, for instance, and like pretty much every single year there's only like 2, maybe 3 teams you can pick, whereas the NFL, I mean, going into this year, it was in the playoffs, all the top seeded teams didn't come in hot by any means. All the hottest teams in the NFL were all the wild card teams, like the Colts, the Ravens, the Eagles. So the parity meshes well with the star power. You got Breeze, that's usually in the playoffs. Brady, that's always in the playoffs. So should be a good year.
Yeah,
that's definitely true. And you even look at the teams that are kind of up and coming, like Cleveland could have a chance to be good. The Packers could get back on track. The Vikings could get back on track. There's a ton of teams out there that could make a push this year. And you see such shuffling of the deck in the NFL where teams from the bottom suddenly rise to the top and vice versa, that it makes it exciting to know that anything can happen in the coming year.
Yeah, and a lot of it is going to be exciting to look out for over the offseason just to see what all develops into these teams and what can make them the next Super Bowl team to come out of their conference. But like I said, we're plenty of months away from that now. But we're going to move a little bit away from the NFL for now. So we're going to focus on college football. There was one major story that happened this past week. Actually happened was notified on Super Bowl Sunday. That was former Florida State quarterback Deondre Francois was dismissed from the Seminoles football team due to a video that surfaced of him assaulting or domestic violence against his, not sure if his current or ex-girlfriend, but it was notified that late Saturday, Florida State had dismissed him from the football team. And then it was Sunday when the video surfaced out on social media. And you look at Florida State, they've had a downfall last year, didn't make it to a bowl game. The new head coach didn't really seem to do too much for them at Willie Target. And then, like I said, they didn't really have an identity on that team. So, Ryan, will we see a continued downfall for Florida State this year now with Francois no longer being on that team?
I don't necessarily think we'll see more of a downfall without Francois being on the team. In college football, if you have a quarterback that's not one of the top 5 to 10 quarterbacks, they're pretty much interchangeable with anybody that you have on the team. We've seen it with Notre Dame, where Ian Book went down, and then they replaced him fairly easily and didn't lose any games there. We've even seen with the best player or the best teams like Clemson, Kelly Bryant, obviously was solid, but then Trevor Lawrence turned out to be better. You can find a good quarterback in college football, or at least a quarterback to fill the shoes of one that you had before. I think the bigger problem from Florida State, though, is not at quarterback, though. I think it's that they're suddenly probably 4th best team in their state. So you have Miami that's probably going to be rising again this year after sort of a disappointing season. You have the Gators that are one of the SEC standouts who are getting better as well, and had a huge bowl win. And then you have UCF, who was undefeated for 2 whole seasons until finally losing a close game without their starting quarterback in the bowl season. So suddenly when kids in the area are looking for schools to go to, there's no reason to pick Florida State anymore. There's 3 other schools that you can go to that are probably going to give you a better chance to win in college football than Florida State. And I think that's where their problem lies, is they don't have a coach that draws anymore. They don't have anything special about their program right now.
Yeah, and you kind of look at the landscape in Florida State. They've been known for being a top team in the ACC for quite some time. Then we saw kind of some inconsistent play. Obviously, when Francois was the quarterback getting injured a couple years ago, at the beginning of the season. Then we saw their head coach go to Texas A&M. Then there's a quarterback competition. Neither of the quarterbacks really played that well. They don't make a bowl game. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't a huge fan of the coaching hire that they had just because he coached 1 year at Oregon and it wasn't that successful either. So I think that it's going to be another disappointing season for Florida State. I think that they'll still be close to getting a bowl game. They might get a bowl game, get 6 or 7 wins. But I think after this year, we're going to see a new head coach there in Florida State, and they're going to get a big hire that's going to make them a top program in the next few years. But I just don't see them improving at all this year. But, yeah, we're going to move on here. I know Eric had said that he wanted to focus a little bit more on the NFL because he's more familiar with that. So we're going to move on to actually some more football that is actually set to start this weekend, and that's the AAF, and that's the Alliance of American Football. So the season's set to begin. It's a 10-week season. There'll be 4 games a week. 2 games will be played on Saturday. 2 games will be played on Sunday. And it's time for us to do what we're going to be doing each week for the next 10 weeks. That's saying what team's going to win each week for the AAF. So, Ryan, this week we have the 2 Saturday games. We got Atlanta going to Orlando, and then San Diego going to San Antonio. Sunday we got Memphis going to Birmingham, and Salt Lake going to Arizona. So, who do you have winning each game this week?
And this is a tough pick, obviously, because we don't know how any of these teams are going to be collectively. I'm just kind of looking at some of the players on their team and trying to make an educated guess based on that. The 2 games that I'm most confident in picking are, I'm going to say Atlanta over Orlando and then Birmingham over Memphis. Then in the other 2 games, I'm going to go San Diego and I'm going to go Salt Lake. And I think that Salt Lake hopefully is going to get a big win for the state of Utah because they have never had a professional football team. And then same with Birmingham. I think those 2 teams are going to come in strong. And then I like the roster that Atlanta has actually put together, so I think they're going to beat Orlando. And I have very little logic for any of these picks, but I'm running on a high from picking the Super Bowl right, so I'm just going to roll with that.
And you definitely deserve that. So go ahead, Eric.
I think I can contribute to this one. So I'm going to go with the lines of whatever city doesn't have an NFL equivalent team, that's who I'm going with. So we're going to do Orlando, San Antonio, Salt Lake, and what was the last time? Memphis and Birmingham?
Memphis and Birmingham, yeah.
Is it Birmingham, Alabama?
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm no Roll Tider, so we're going to go Memphis in that bad boy.
That would actually be really cool if every team that didn't have an NFL franchise won. That would just kind of be like, hey, NFL, look at this.
Yeah.
You mean it will be cool when it happens?
Sorry, yeah, that's what I meant, exactly.
Yeah, so looking at my picks, I like Orlando just because I think Steve Spurrier is a great coach there. I think he can do some things for them. I like San Diego over San Antonio. I love Mike Martz and his offense. I think that could be a key factor for that game. I'm going to pick Birmingham over Memphis because Trent Richardson's on that team, and I kind of hope that he goes off this year for the AAF. And then I like Arizona over Salt Lake. A lot of people are picking Arizona to win this year in the AAF, so that's why I'm going with them. And like I said, a lot of this is hard to pick because we've never really seen any of these teams play before. And if you do want to catch any of the games this week, they'll be on CBS and CBS Sports Network. They also just did come out with a couple of new TV deals as well with NFL Network, who will be streaming games weekly, and then also Turner Sports and Bleacher Report Live. I believe Turner will be broadcasting 1 or 2 games per year, and then Bleacher Report Live should have like at least 1 game a week. So if you have any of those platforms, definitely make sure to get a look at the Alliance of American Football. And it is important to also know that there is supposed to be an app coming out for the league. It has yet to come out from what I've heard, but it should be coming out soon, hopefully. So in those cases, they'll allow you to watch the games as well. But we'll just have to wait for that to come out. And when it does, is the big question here.
I want to point out, too, that we actually have some star power in that Birmingham versus Memphis matchup, because you have, Eric, you'll remember this name, Scott Tolzien plays for the Birmingham Iron, and then, as Ian mentioned, Trent Richardson, and then former San Diego Chargers kicker Nick Novak is on that team. And then on Memphis, you have Christian Hackenberg, Zach Mettenberger, Zach Stacy, who was at one point a prominent running back for the Rams. They actually have some good players on that team. So if there's a game worth checking out, I think it's that one.
Ooh, the hack. I love it.
I know. I never got a chance in the NFL even.
Yeah. No, Scott Tolzien, that's pretty interesting. Even more interesting is he bought my friends and I a shot once on Water Street. So, yeah, I'll root for him.
There it is. It's that information.
Inside. But let's stick with the Alliance for another second here. So, obviously, we don't really know what to expect from this league this year. With the XFL coming next year as well, we could have 3 prime pro football leagues being played throughout the year. So, what's on a scale of 1 to 10? What's your excitement for this new league, and then why are you thinking that number? So, whichever one wants to go first, go ahead.
I'll go first.
All right, you go.
I think most like football fans, casuals speaking, it's gonna be like a 3 or 4 out of 10 in terms of excitement, and might suffer a bad rep from people becoming a little disenfranchised with the NFL, and then they'll be like, oh, this is gonna be more of the same. Unfortunately, it seems like to generate excitement, there'd have to be some sort of gimmick, and I don't know anything about the league, so maybe there is, and I just don't know it. But from what you've told me, I think a lot of people are going to not give it a fair chance because of their qualms about the NFL. They won't see it being any different.
I think that Eric proves his own point by not knowing much about the AAF, because Eric is a pretty... he's a reliable sports fan when it comes to the NFL. Like, he knows what happens in the NFL. He follows up with it. He does not know much about the AAF, so that is a testament to how good of a job they've done marketing so far, is that very few people actually know that this is happening, and very few people are actually talking about it. So I think he's absolutely right that the casual sports fan might say, oh, there's football going on, that's interesting, and then not really think anything else about it. But there is one thing that I think is a huge positive about this. Well, I guess 2 things. One is that there are some teams that either lost NFL franchises or have never had one that are now getting a AAF team, which that's going to be exciting for those cities and could generate buzz in that way. And the other thing that I think bumps this excitement up to at least a 5 out of 10 is that so far there has been nothing political stated about this league. And that's what's been so frustrating with the NFL recently, is that everything that happens has to have some sort of political magnitude, which is exactly what I don't want when I tune into a sporting event. I want to watch sports to forget about the fact that there's politics going on. I want to watch sports to forget about the fact that there's strife, that there's division somewhere in our country. And hopefully tuning into the AAF, we'll see people playing football, and we won't have to hear about race, and we won't have to hear about divides. And I think that's something that we could all potentially be excited about for this league, is to view a sport that we all, for the most part, think is cool and fun to watch and get to enjoy it for what it is, as opposed to the message that's supposed to be portrayed through it by the higher up powers.
Can I piggyback on that quick? So just because I don't know, like what media outlets, so is it just CBS? Because what my worry would be is, let's say the AAF starts taking off and doing better. In my opinion, paparazzi media, the more coverage there is, the more it will kind of morph into what you don't like about the NFL.
So, yeah, so basically it's the Prime Networks, CBS, and TNT. They're going to be covering only a couple of the games per year as of right now. As of right now, CBS is only doing the first game and the championship game. TNT, I believe, is doing the first game week 2 and then one of the playoff games. Otherwise, the networks that you can only see these games on will be either Turner Sports NFL Network, CBS Network, or Bleacher Report Live. So these are outlets that aren't main or television stations, so you usually either have to get a specific package, or for Bleacher Report Live, you have to download the app and then I think you have to pay a certain monthly fee in order to see this. So this is something. It's kind of they're going out on a limb here, hoping that people are going to get these packages in order to see these teams. So that's something that could hurt them a little bit and have lower viewership. But also, it's helping out a lot of these TV providers getting these networks that don't necessarily get much coverage or much viewership. So I think it's a unique play, honestly.
Eric, to your point, though, you're absolutely right. If this thing does get big and they do add teams and all of a sudden it's televised all over the place and people are playing fantasy AAF, and people are seeing it on SportsCenter, it's 100% going to get politicized because that's what ESPN does to everything. That's what Yahoo does to everything. That's what most major news outlets are looking for, is some way to politicize things that otherwise would not be politicized. But I think for now, at least, it's small enough that we hopefully don't have to worry about immediately seeing protests about the national anthem. Hopefully it's small enough that we don't have to immediately see things about how there's a discrepancy in who's being hired in it. So I think for now, at least, it's a bit of a relief to be able to see something that has a blank slate and that we don't have all these negative connotations with like we have for the NFL.
It's like a hipster football league.
Sort of. You could replace it with hacky sacky.
True. But I'm gonna give it about a 6 here. So I'm gonna say it's gonna be kind of like the average outcome, but with a smidge of excitement. Just because when the XFL came out originally back in what was like the early 2000s, that lasted 1 year. Obviously, there was a lot of excitement because it was Vince McMahon coming in. He was going to say how they're going to take over the NFL. They had this unique-looking ball. They had a lot of unique-looking camera angles. And
you could do whatever you wanted to other people on the field and not get penalties.
Exactly. And the thing that became the issue was there wasn't good football that was being played. And I think with this AFF, I think with the new XFL, I think the football play is going to improve drastically to enough where I don't expect to see either one of these outdo the NFL in rate, like television viewership or ratings, but they're going to do well enough where they're going to be able to run multiple seasons on. And then possibly if we do see a decline in the NFL, one of these could possibly leap them. Like I said, if that were to happen, it's probably not going to happen for like 10 years. But with some of the stuff that's happened in the NFL, with the protesting, some of the key players with domestic violence, these leagues have that opportunity. But it's all going to depend on how they start in their first year.
I think what they should do is mandate that every game played in the AAF be played in snow.
And
just find a way to have driving snow in every single game. I would tune in for each one.
And the thing is, with some of these cities, you have those opportunities. Salt Lake's the big example.
I really hope Salt Lake City, every game has precipitation.
Yeah, that's definitely something we'd love to see, and hopefully it does happen at least one point in the first season. But we're at that end of the show, so what do we usually talk about? Fantasy football. So obviously, since the season's over, we're kind of evaluating different stuff from fantasy purposes. And this week, we're going to look at the OP position in fantasy football. That's known as the offensive player. Now, this is a position that isn't used in standard fantasy football leagues, but does make some leagues interesting with it making it more high scoring, giving teams opportunities to kind of think when it comes to draft time. Because with an offensive player position, you can put any offensive player out there, even a second quarterback, which means you have to use a second quarterback in your draft and possibly not draft another running back or receiver. So what are your thoughts on this? Are you guys a fan of the offensive position player in fantasy football, or is this some of the leagues that you try to avoid?
Me personally, I would probably avoid it. I mean, I'm not as avid fantasy football player, although that's kind of hypocritical. I was in 5 leagues this year. I guess I almost like in fantasy sports being pigeonholed, if that makes sense. You know, forced to work with what you got. Whereas I think fantasy customization can go a little too far. You know, it's kind of like some people avoid auction drafts because depending on your level of like the average person that pays attention in the league, like let's say you have like my girlfriend did a fantasy league with us. She doesn't really know too much about it, whereas like in a snake draft, she can still get a pretty solid team, and she did have a pretty solid team this year just because players inevitably fall to her. Whereas like an auction draft, you can really get screwed if you don't know which people are going to be good because people can just bid for them. I feel like you might have a bit of that with this offensive player position where it's going to be like a new meta, if you will, to use video game terms, where a lot of people are going to figure out what is the best way to go about this. And I think it might just be a little too much.
Yeah, I think that the more you start to add other positions kind of to inflate the score, the more you get into new ways to game the system, new ideals of how to do this. And just the more players you add, the more variance there is in what kind of scoring you're going to get. But at the same time, there's going to be less for everybody else. So it's kind of nice to have your one quarterback. Maybe you have a backup quarterback that you carry too, and to have, that's your guy. Otherwise, you're probably picking like quarterbacks in your first 2 rounds because they're generally the most high scoring. But then all of a sudden the quarterback becomes the new running back position. So it's like all these extra questions that you don't necessarily want to deal with get asked on how you manage this team and this process of drafting these players. Plus, I'm more of a purist in general. I didn't even have a flex position in the league I manned this year. I had an extra receiver spot. Eric wasn't happy with me, but I'm purist in that way. So I'm probably going to avoid more of those drafts that get into things like that, more of the drafts that get into defensive players too, more of the drafts that are auction type. I would just kind of want to go with the basic thing that I already know how to do.
Yeah, and
if you would have went PPR, it would have been fine.
There's the hostility.
But looking at this, it's kind of a unique situation because Eric, I'm in the same role with you. I did 5 fantasy leagues this year, and it drove me nuts. But none of them. I remember one year, the league I run, I changed it to where I brought the offensive player into the play. And we're in a 12-team league. So that means each player's basically everyone drafted 2 quarterbacks. Some players even drafted 3 quarterbacks. So if it gets to that point where one of your quarterbacks is on a bye, you're at that point where I need to draft a quarterback to have a chance because a lot of these teams in this format play 2 quarterbacks. And when it comes to this, drafting becomes a key purpose, as you mentioned, Ryan, as well, meaning you might have to draft quarterbacks higher than usual. You might have to conserve how you use the waiver wire a little bit. It brings in a lot of questions on how you should play your team and how you should run your team. So after that 1 year, I took it out just because as much as the scoring was awesome, you could tell that there was a lot of dysfunction in the league. I think that's typically what happens in these kind of leagues. Unless you like a high-scoring offensive league, then do it. But if you don't if you want it more standard and run kind of in a fair aspect, then I think that you should just do it the standard way. So I've tried it. I'm not a big fan of it. I wouldn't recommend it. I think standard's the best way to go.
The point you bring up, too, about quarterbacks is that there's only really 1 per team that gets playing time. Every other position, wide receiver, you have like 3 to 5 players that can get touches a game. Running back, you get 2 to 3. So there's an abundance of these other positions so that if you have 2 or 3 of them, it doesn't really impact the whole thing. But with quarterbacks, if you have like a 12-team league and each team has 2 quarterbacks and then start to think about an extra one for a bye, all of a sudden that's 24 quarterbacks that aren't there, and then you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel with you might have had to start a Brett Hundley in like 2017, So it's just not the same plethora of options when you go offensive player because everyone just wants the quarterback.
Yeah. I'd agree with Ryan because I was going to ask Ian what that did to your waiver wire because one of the things I took to fantasy basketball first just because I'm more knowledgeable with the NBA than the NFL. But I really grown to love fantasy football too, and part of the reason is because of the contrast between that in fantasy basketball, Ryan, I'm sure you can attest to, where I firmly believe that obviously the draft is important with fantasy football, but I think as far as like teams that make the playoffs in fantasy go, it's won and lost on your waiver wire pickups, whereas inversely in fantasy basketball, if you have a crappy draft, good luck, Chuck. You're kind of screwed for the rest of the season.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you on that point. Waiver wire is, I think, the key aspect to having a successful fantasy team. I remember in one of my leagues this year, I picked up Marvin Mack on the waiver wire, and I had a few good weeks with him. I was able to trade him, get someone back in return for a spot I needed, and ended up making the playoffs after I looked like it wasn't even coming close to making it. So waiver wire does play a key factor into controlling how your league ends up turning out.
Yeah, and it's sort of when you have an offensive player role, it's making it more like fantasy basketball, where all of a sudden there's less options for you to choose from of people that are starting. Because that's what's hard about fantasy basketball, is that realistically each team has, 5 starters, maybe like 6 to 7 that are going to contribute and have decent numbers per team per night. So most of those players are all taken up by the time you get to the point that there's waiver wire. So like you're really looking for a player that's going to be slightly above average. You're not going to find those gems usually in fantasy basketball, which that's part of what makes fantasy football fun, is that you can pick up like a Marlon Mack among other players that are all of a sudden going to do really well for you and could really make your team. And I think that's part of the appeal of fantasy football. So eliminating some of that and adding the quarterback spot to make a player where there's only one of each per team kind of defeats the purpose to some degree. There's
Right.
still
Well,
strategy and everything, but
especially when in fantasy football, even if the guy's kind of a fringe player, you only need him to do well once. Where some like fantasy basketball, if you're gonna pick up a guy even for a week, you need them to have, 3, maybe 4 good games. So that's kind of the appeal there, is you have so many people that can, just have that flash game, like how many wide receivers can do that? You had DJ Moore, who would all of a sudden figure out how to play football for a week.
Calvin Ridley,
Mike Williams,
like 33 points in 2 games or more.
Right.
Yeah. And with all that said, that does conclude this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesday. Now, before Ryan and I give to our final thoughts, Eric, how about you tell everyone where we can find you on Twitter, and tell us a little bit about the podcast Running Back.
Sure. Well, to my knowledge, we don't have a Twitter handle, but we have a Facebook page. The pod is called Run It Back, where probably about 40% is Bucks talk, and then Sam, my co-host, and I will usually have a top 10 list where we try to make it not your typical top 10 players in the NBA. We'll go a little more in depth, and then from there we'll cover everything from trades and rumors to we're actually looking forward to the off season, having segments where we explain how the cap system works, since it's more complicated than people realize. Generally runs about as long as your guys do, and unlike your guys, we don't really have a consistent time when we go on. It's really just whenever we're feeling proactive rather than reactive. But it's been good to be a part of Brew Sports. It's been good exposure, and I'd love to have both of you guys on at some point too.
Run It Back is funny too. Like if you listen to it, there's some really quality one-liners in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We try.
Ryan, what are your closing thoughts for today?
Yeah, thanks everyone for continuing to listen and support the show. We look forward to doing this each and every week. And now that we're heading into the off season, we are going to come up with a lot of interesting topics as more news comes out. I'm sure some people are going to screw up and get arrested real soon. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to Draft Talk. And big thanks to Eric Klamrowski for coming on the show. We'd love to have you on again and have Sam on again as well. Well, Sam on for the first time, but feels like he was here in spirit.
Yeah, Sam knows football better than I do, so he'd actually be able to talk about every segment you guys have. I mean, when it came to the college football one, really all I was thinking of, I agree. I don't support domestic violence either.
Well, you have to say that, or else you could be fired or something.
Yeah, I'll get fired from my own podcast.
Yeah, all right. Well, with that said, again, thanks to everyone listening for this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Boost Sports. Make sure to listen to us each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker. Make sure to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter. And if you're on Twitter, look for us on the handle at TDWN2's podcast. And make sure to use that hashtag Touchdown Tuesdays podcast. Look out for our question of the week coming up in the next couple of days. This week's question had mixed results. Twitter chose the Patriots. Facebook chose the Rams. Twitter won this week. Who's going to win next week? We'll find out then. Again, thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your night, everyone.